What is up, everyone? I'm Jeff Lund, and this is the Mediocre Alaskan Podcast, where we are intolerant, weak-minded attitudes that keep people from pursuing new and exciting things in the areas of fitness, outdoors, and general lifestyle. The general lifestyle that we're going to talk today is going to be with my buddy Brett Fera. He's the Director of Student Media at the University of Arizona. Interesting time to be a Wildcat fan nowadays, after a couple days after the loss in the first round of the NCAA tournament, but also with the FBI investigations, with the turmoil surrounding the athletic department. So we're going to talk what it is to be a student journalist in college right now, what it is to be a journalist in general, talk about journalism ethics, talk about personal ethics when it comes to social media, things like that, and also we're going to talk about some Arizona basketball history. So if you're an Arizona basketball fan, this is definitely something that you will agree with, get angry at, or either otherwise. As long as you're listening, it's all good. Make sure you go to themediocrealaskan.com for other content, and here we go with episode 32. All right, well, let's get started here. First of all, give me a little weather update down there.
Gorgeous. It's so I'm in Oro Valley, which is north of the city, and I'm staring out my window in my office. I have a 2-story house, so I'm looking outside, staring at the mountains up here, the Catalinas, and there's no snow on there, but there's cloud cover, and it looks like it's going to rain today, so there might be snow on the mountains by tonight.
Wow.
So I'll take that. I mean, it's nice anyway this time of year, even if it's not rainy and cold, but we got about another month until things explode.
Yeah. What's your rainy and cold when you say that?
Oh, no, nothing like what you experience. Rainy and cold is anything that has water coming down is nice for me. I mean, rainy and cold is probably in the 50s right now. About a month or two ago, I mean, it gets into the 30s in December, which obviously is, again, nothing like what you got, but still cold enough that when your body is adjusted to it, it feels cold. But I like it. I'll embrace that, and I'll go outside and go play around in shorts and a T-shirt in the 30-degree weather. I'll take that.
Having weather it's really nice when every day is the same and it's sunny and warm and comfortable. You get lulled into thinking that it's always like that.
That's why I actually am a fan of the monsoons during the summer, even though they're kind of a pain in the butt sometimes. They change it up and they're uncomfortable because it's humid and all that. But at the bare minimum, it's something different. When it's 2 months of 105, that's when I start to get tired.
It was almost 50 yesterday, actually the last 2 days, and it's been so clear, beautiful, pretty calm, and so people are going nuts up here. Just the optimism is, you can just feel it in everybody. But it's relative. 50 degrees and sunny here. That's it's about all you can ask for at this point in the year. So, except for if we're going to ask for something else, obviously we're still dealing with the Arizona loss a couple days ago to Buffalo. What was your reaction as that was all going down? Was it the fitting end to a season that was tumultuous, or did you think that it was one of those years where tumultuous season that it's going to galvanize everything and the team's going to make a run? What were you thinking before the game?
Before the game, I didn't think they were going to lose. I mean, I thought they could lose because we've seen it and we've seen them play that way, but I didn't think they were going to. And I even didn't think so with 6 minutes into the second half. I still thought Arizona was going to win somehow when they were down about 5 or 6, 2 at the half and then 5 or 6, about 5 or 6 minutes in. But I think we saw it as well. And I know this is another topic of conversation probably, but even the next night with Virginia, and this is great, and this is also scary for the way that these tournaments are set up. They're not set up for the best team to win these tournaments. And I'm not saying Arizona was the best team or anything. They're set up for get hot, expose a weakness, or 5 in the case of Buffalo versus Arizona, and win 30 minutes or 20 minutes of a 40-minute game. Yeah. And I think Virginia dealt with that too. There's no way anyone would argue UMBC is a better team than Virginia, that UMBC is a better team than 40 to 50 of the teams in that tournament. But they found weaknesses, exposed it, and they hit shots. And you're a basketball player. I'm not. So you could probably attest to this. But am I wrong to think that the difference between the really great teams and the next tier of teams is much closer today than it was 20 years ago, in the sense that all these guys can shoot. I mean, if these guys take as many shots in the gym and practice as much as they can, the difference of what we're talking about is athleticism and sometimes coaching and strategy. So if the coaching and strategy breaks down, which I think it did with Arizona and I think it did with Virginia, and I say that as a non-expert, and the teams they're playing are hitting shots and doing what they're supposed to do in the other aspects of the game, like against Arizona, cutting off the defense or cutting off the passing lanes and doing all those kind of things, they absolutely have a chance to win. So going in, I kind of was nervous about that. I mean, a lot of people were talking about Arizona's road to get to San Antonio and that it was easier than we thought because the hard games were early on. Because even the number 2 in that region, Cincinnati, and the number Cincinnati and Texas and Nevada and Tennessee. I mean, that's not a murderer's row. So you're really going up. It was really the thought process was, okay, it's Kentucky, Virginia, and then it's a downhill run and see if you can stay on the tracks. And that, I think what happened was a microcosm of this entire season in one 18-minute, 16-minute stretch that they let inferior teams play close to them. They couldn't figure out how to maximize the advantage of having the best player in the country on the floor. And they just ran into a buzzsaw. And I don't even know, I know I've just said a lot. I don't even know if trying to explain it has any value because it happened. Yeah. It happened. We all watched it, and the better team in that moment won by far, obviously. And I think to me, though, it's the most telling part, and this is obviously a whole nother aspect of what we've said we'll talk about today, but is the interaction and reaction of the Arizona fan base as this is all beforehand, as it's all going on, and then after. I mean, fickle doesn't even begin to define it. And I'm not even criticizing people when I say that. But it's pretty fascinating how quickly mindsets change, even during the course of the game, like that. How fans and people following this program have changed their perspective over and over again on what they want out of this team and this program.
Yeah, I want to do 2 things. The first thing you said about the better team on that night, and Arizona always gets the best from the other opponent. And if you look at the NCAA tournament, like you said, it's not set up for the best team to win. It's set up for the team that at the time is the hottest. And if it happens to be one of the top 4, then it makes sense.
And usually, to be fair, it's one of the top 8, which I think is fine. Like I don't have a problem with not a top 8 team winning. I would love to see a non-power conference team school win and stuff. But I think we can both acknowledge it's set up for one of the best teams to win because their road is usually a little bit simpler. So I don't think it's like a complete, crapshoot at all.
And as you said, like teams can shoot. And if Arizona was to play Buffalo 10 times, maybe Buffalo wins 2 or 3 times, and only once does it happen the way it did. And that was hitting shots. So if you are helping off on the drive and they're hitting the shots, it doesn't matter. There are times where they were absolutely guarded and the guy's still making it. And it just same thing with Virginia. The offensive efficiency that Baltimore County had in the second half was unbelievable. They were averaging 1.5 points per possession, which is ridiculous. Virginia just could not stop them. And that's, again, you play that game 10 times, maybe they only win once, and it happens to be like that. And that's a couple years ago when Kentucky was undefeated. Wisconsin beats Arizona, and they just played out of their minds. And Decker will look like an all-world player.
Yep.
And then Wisconsin beats undefeated Kentucky, and you're thinking, oh, well, it's over now. Wisconsin, they played a great game against Kentucky. They beat Kentucky. Now all they have to do is beat Duke, but then Duke beats them because you have that one game where everything is just like you are closest to your maximum potential as you can be, and you had that win, but to hold that up, which is why Buffalo lost the next game. And that's why you don't have these Cinderellas go too far, because they have that max game early. And sometimes the upset special, the one that you expect, doesn't happen because them at their best, they could give this team a run, but then they're not at their best. The shot doesn't go down.
I had this conversation with my dad yesterday, actually. He goes, as great as it's been these couple of days, he goes, do you think the tournament is less interesting than it used to be? And I said, that's a weird question because I think the first 4 days are more interesting, but wait till we get to next weekend. There's only, I mean, I know Loyola Chicago is in the Sweet 16, but we might get through today and see one double-digit seed and a lot of power programs that are kind of like, okay, we know they're going to be there kind of things, even the Kentuckys of the world by the end of the day today. And I think that's kind of interesting to see that the second weekend usually neutralizes a lot of this, or getting to the second weekend usually neutralizes some of this. That's why, people want to talk about Butler a few years back and being this great wonderkin coming up. Butler was a 5 seed when they played Duke. I mean, that's not, the championship seeding every year, or it's very rarely is. But at the same time, if you're the 5th seed, at worst, you're tied for 17th in the country. So going into the tournaments, I mean, you're not a bad team. You could beat anybody on any night. So it's when we're talking about these Florida Gulf Coasts and George Masons and stuff like that are interesting. And that's where I'm curious to see, how some of these other schools like Loyola, for example, what they're able to do, or see today what UMBC does.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as the Arizona fan base,
dated this podcast, by the way, by talking about things that we'll know by the end of the day today.
Yeah. I'm going to publish this almost immediately after we're done. The Arizona fan base thing was interesting too, because there was the people defending Sean Miller. The initial reaction was, now we're the new Memphis, now we're the new UNLV, whatever tainted program. And then that was the knee jerk reaction, no due process. And then, well, he can coach. Cool. Well, if we can get away with this or whatever's happening, maybe he's not guilty, full support, us against the world. And now that it's over, it's just so strange. In the 90s, when Lute Olson had those 2001 and then 97 and then 94 and then 88, a senior class, if you were to stay for your 4 years, you would have been going to a Final Four if you played there.
01 was the last. I guess you could technically say that 04 was the last senior class.
Yeah.
Because they were in the 01, maybe not. Yeah. 04. It was, if there was anybody, I'm not even sure there was anyone left from that 01 freshman group. But anyway, yeah, it went through 04. 01 was being the last Final Four where, I remember that was the old SIDs, Rich Page and Tom Duddleston used to chuck that out there all the time, that every 4-year class reached a Final Four.
And then the optimism changed because there were those weird years in between. And then there was the, 06, and then 07, we lost to Purdue barely got in as an 8 seed. And then the next year we're a 10 seed and lose to Virginia. And then as a 12 seed in 09, when we weren't supposed, or when I say we, I don't really mean we, but Arizona. That was with
Russ Pennell.
Yes, I believe so. And I was thinking about guards players. And, we upset Utah, and then someone else who would upset is like Cleveland State or something like that, and we get destroyed by Louisville. And then just, where do we go from here? And then Miller picks it up, and then there's 3 Elite Eights in 5 years, I think.
Yeah.
And so it's like a totally different sort of optimism. So where it was, okay, be a little bit patient because this team is going to get to a Final Four, a 4-year cycle of getting to the Final Four. Then
I'm so glad you're asking this because I am winding up to answer this right now. I love this discussion.
Then we're so close, but we're not getting all the way. We have, these teams are legit teams that can go to after Arizona beat Duke in 2011, just destroyed them, and then lose to Connecticut. The optimism has changed so much. And now it's like, this has to be the year. And we're not even making the Final Fours anymore, but maybe these teams were better. Crazy.
So there's a couple of things. You mentioned that 08-09 team. I think it was Nick Wise and Kyle Fogg and those guys. And this is a totally tangent, but Kyle Fogg is one of the coolest stories, I think, that's undercovered about Arizona basketball. I mean, the dude is literally like the best player not in the U.S. I mean, statistically speaking, he goes for 50 like every other game. And it's pretty awesome when you think about the fact that, we talk about the NBA and of course the NBA is the benchmark of basketball in the world, but there's still some pretty good basketball elsewhere. And compared to other sports that don't really have that, other than soccer, maybe, that don't really have that, and I'm talking team sports, that same equivalency from country to country.
or something close enough to be really, truly competitive. And he's out there dominating. I think he's won that made for TV competition where he's won $1 million a couple years in a row now. And so anyway, I that team was fun, if nothing else. And to your point, even though this was the Russ Pennell team, even though it was transition and even though whatever, they got a lucky draw. That's part of it. I think they played a 13 seed in the second round. So, I mean, there's some luck involved, but it was Cleveland State. That's right. And so even with that, though, and then they absolutely got railroaded by Louisville. I think that Louisville loss is still the worst Arizona loss in the last 4 years. I think they lost by like 39 or something like crazy like that.
Yeah.
39, 103 to 64. 39? Yeah, 39 points. Yikes. Yeah. But so anyway, to the bigger point of your question about getting there and getting over the hump, and I love this argument, and this is not meant to be a complete, especially with everything over the last month and all this season. This is not meant to be a complete defense of Sean Miller, because I have plenty of issues as a fan. I have plenty of issues journalistically with working with students that cover these programs. But nevertheless, what is the Final Four? I mean, I'll ask that question, sort of rhetorically, but what is the Final Four? It's this manufactured thing that people have said college basketball is going to take the 4 final teams, because that's how we break the bracket. And we're going to put them in a city and we're going to celebrate those 4 teams. And you don't even have to make the championship game or win it to be considered a gigantic success that year. If you get to the Final Four, you can put a banner up and it's exciting. Wow. But what about other sports in college? Basketball or baseball and softball. If you get to the College World Series, you're one of the 8 best teams in men's and women's for the men's College World Series and the women's College World Series. So if you take that logic that it's this manufactured ideology, Arizona, and I guess the easiest way to put it is if Sean Miller was a baseball coach, he's already a Hall of Famer. Yeah. I mean, he's been to 5 Elite Eights in his career? In baseball, that's the equivalent of 5 College World Series. So I know it's not the same and how the games are played are different, but the point is that we decide the Final Four as this magical being because it's taken on this other life. And the reality is that coming a shot away from the Final Four literally 5 times under both Miller and Olsen since 2001. So, I mean, 2003 against Kansas, 2005 against Illinois, and then UConn in 2011, and then the 2 Kansas games. They're more or less a shot. I know one of those Kansas games wasn't a shot away, but more or less a shot or 2 away from a Final Four 5 times in 15 years. I think that's a pretty good sign that things are going okay. Yeah. But the fan base has basically pulled this can't get them over the hump card over and over again. And I think it's absolute insanity to think that you're that close and that proves you can't get over the hump. It's one shot. We saw it last night with Michigan. They don't make that shot and they're done in the second round. They make that shot. They might be a Final Four team now. It's one shot. And that's not coaching. I mean, coaching is getting them to that point, but at some point the players have to play. And that is no knock on the players either. So anyway, I know that's a really weird argument but it burns in my head because the Final Four is this made up thing and it's great and I love it, but we've decided it's this end game when the reality is that if you're finishing in the Elite 8 every year or in the Sweet 16 every year, if you're in the Elite 8, you're tied for 5th in the country. If you're in the Sweet 16, you're tied for 9th in the country. I mean, there's something to be said about that if you're a top 9 program every single year, more or less, that you're doing things right. And the reality is, though, I think getting so close almost makes it harder. Yeah. But I don't think people see it with that same lens that I do, and I don't blame them. I mean, I think I'm off my rocker on this, but it's still how I analyze it.
Well, in the 90s, the knock on Arizona was that those early round burnouts.
Yeah.
And so while
Miami, Ohio, Santa Clara.
Yeah, it was more consistent getting to the Final Four as far as the end game was there. The time
right. You had no Elite Eights and Sweet 16s. You had Final Fours or you had first or second round.
Yeah. And so that was the knock. But as long as you're getting there, and I don't think that Lute Olson has been overly praised. I think the amount of excitement surrounding him and the aura that he has is absolutely, do not question that. I mean, the guy, what he did at Arizona should not be questioned whatsoever.
Yeah.
but it is interesting, the fan base now in this, when is it going to be our turn again? And like you said, if it happened to be the final 8, if they did the final 8 as a separate little thing on a different weekend and had those 8 teams there and took the College World Series sort of model, then how much different would the perception be? But
right. So let's just say in the mid 80s, when they were revamping it to a 64 team bracket and stuff, or early 80s, I think it was early 80s, right? That they decided we're going to pick one city and we're going to change the bracket so that we do. I mean, maybe it's not 8 teams in a location. Maybe it's 4 teams in a location. I'm going to get my math wrong because I'm not looking at a grid on this. But let's just say 4 teams in a location for the first 3 rounds. And we do 3 games in 5 days at 8 different sites around the country, or 16 sites around the country. And then I don't know. I'm getting it. Or 8, maybe it's 8 teams at 8 sites. And then those 8 winners end up in the Elite 8, which is at, a big dome stadium and takes place over 5 days. We would be excited today about all 8 teams making the Elite 8.
Yeah.
I mean, I have a poster on my wall of when Arizona in 2004, when I was a student, went to the College World Series, and there's 8 teams up there. Yeah. And they didn't win it, but it's still pretty cool that they were part of it. I want to say Texas won it that year. I think it is this manufactured thing that we've decided it's this big deal. And so to me, I'm not going to use that to decipher if a coach is good enough or not.
Yeah.
I'm going to look at things like, Roy Williams, I heard this weekend, an incredible stat. And it makes sense if you really think about it, because they've had a lot of 1 and 2 seeds, which is a testament to him. But Roy Williams in his career, he's 28-0 in the first round of the NCAA tournament as a coach. 28-0. He's never lost a first round game. Sean Miller's lost 2 in 3 years. Yeah. Lute Olson lost a couple, has pretty high seeds, but Roy Williams at Kansas and North Carolina has won 28 and lost 0. Now that's, again, probably a testament to the fact I bet you he's been a 1 seed 14 times. Yeah. So he's 14 of those 135 that hadn't lost until Friday night. Yeah. But I think that's the stuff I would rather use to evaluate than whether or not Miller gets a team 1 more basket to get to a Final Four or not. But I think seasons like this are better to evaluate than even the so-called potential Final Four seasons, because when you come in with so many expectations and you meet some of them, I mean, they still won a regular season title. They won a tournament title. As mediocre as the Pac-12 was, that's still something. Mm-hmm. But then to have this kind of flame out right after your hottest point is, I think, more telling than even the teams that could get over the so-called hump.
Yeah. I do think it's good, like you said, that the best team doesn't win every year. And so to celebrate getting to a point where, hey, you've survived all this nonsense to get to the Final Four, I think that's a definitely cool thing. But it's who knows, man? It's crazy.
I mean, at the point that Arizona entered the tournament, they would have to win it all. And people were saying they really thought, okay, Arizona got a chance. I mean, not just your Charles Barkley Bloviators, but like there were a lot of people saying, all right, Arizona's got a chance. Arizona gets past Kentucky and Virginia. They're going to win. They're going to get to the Final Four. They're going to win it all. Yeah. And really bought hook, line, and sinker into what they saw supposedly in the Pac-12 tournament. And that's partially, DeAndre Ayton going for 64 points and 30 rebounds in 2 games, but on Friday and Saturday in that tournament. But that would have meant Arizona would have had to have won 11 straight games. They won 2 straight, which is nothing, to get to the Pac-12 tournament, and then won the 3 Pac-12 tournament games, and then would have had to win 6 more. And that, to me, was never going to happen with this team. Yeah. And that's not a knock on the players, on the coaching. It was just looking at the run of this season. Yeah, they had a run where they won in the teens nonstop after they got back from the Bahamas, but it wasn't the same. I mean, the amount of close games that they played this year was pretty incredible, and even with how many wins, and I think that's a positive to take away from watching this team, is they had a lot of close games, which might be their own fault, but at the same time, they also were able to pull those out. I mean, the number of single digit wins that they had is pretty telling to how much this team did have to overcome as the games went on and the season went on. And that's probably why they were able to win the Pac-12 tournament, is because they learned to play in those kind of mucky situations. Yeah. I mean, that UCLA win in the Pac-12 tournament was probably the best win I've seen this team have in years, just because of what they did in overtime.
Yeah.
And it wasn't enough to get them to the next level, obviously, especially going up against a team that just played out of its gourd the other night. And that's not a knock on Buffalo. I think Buffalo's a good program.
Oh yeah.
It's hard to talk about it because because it sounds like, and I give Sean Miller credit, his post-game press conference was perfectly complimentary, and I especially give Tony Bennett credit against UMBC for what he said. I know everybody is, but they weren't taking anything away for what those other teams did, but they were still analyzing what their teams did wrong. And I don't think that's unfair to do.
No. Worst Arizona tournament loss by whatever standard you want to measure it.
I think there's two standards for that. I think there's most heartbreaking or shocking.
Give me one.
And then I think there's worst. I don't think it's the most heartbreaking or shocking tournament loss. I think most heartbreaking is probably that Illinois game because there's no reason that should have happened. I think the most and the Duke championship game, as weird as this sounds, because they still lost by double digits or close to it, is probably the second most heartbreaking because Arizona had the talent and was in the game until the last couple seconds. And it just, some things didn't go their way. Yeah. Most shocking is probably still those Lute Olson, Miami of Ohio, Santa Clara type losses. But worst loss, I think it is. I think it's the worst loss. If you look at the number, how much they lost by, the fact they were down by 25 points when they were, and granted, I don't buy much into Vegas lines or whatever, whoever predicts this stuff, but they were almost a 10-point favorite and were down by 25 points with 4 minutes to go. That's a 35-point swing on the line. That is massive. So worst loss in that sense, I think it was. I absolutely think it was. And I think there's something to be said that Arizona under Miller in the last 13 months, and I don't think this is entirely his fault. This is the nature of college basketball these days. Like we talked about, hot teams getting hot and everyone can shoot now. But Arizona under Miller in the last 13 months has lost 3 times by 20 or more points. I think it happened 5 times in Lute's entire career here. And a couple of them were very, very early on. And then there were a couple outliers that just were crazy. And then that one we talked about, the Louisville game with Russ Pennell. I think if I remember looking at it right, I went through the media guide Thursday night curiously and this year's media guide and went through the year by year results and didn't take as long as it sounds. It was like 10 minutes. I think in Miller's first year, they lost 2 or 3 times by 20 or more points, and they didn't make the tournament that year. They were a rebuild, all that stuff that we know. And then this year they lost twice. And last year, that Oregon game that they lost, late part of the Pac-12 season in Eugene. But so 3 times in 13 months to lose by that many points, that's alarming. Yeah. Because it didn't used to happen. There was a game I was covering in 2004, and granted, home games are different. I'm not denying that. And Arizona in the last 5 years has had 2 massive home winning streaks, under Miller. But Arizona in 2004, I remember, was playing Stanford at home. In 2004, Justin St. Germain and I were talking about this, a friend of ours that, we obviously knew when we were in school. We're talking about this because some people were talking about this was Seton Hall's first tournament win since 2004. They beat Arizona in the first round. And we were just talking about that year was really a weird season too, and kind of the beginning of the first time we saw cracks in the Lute Olson era. Even though the next year they blurps back to life and were 14-point lead with 4 minutes to go away from getting to the Final Four against Illinois. That 2004 season was really an odd one. It's when they went up and played at Stanford and lost on the 38-footer that kept Stanford unbeaten, and when Tiger Woods rushed the court and all that stuff. But the funny thing was, I think out of what's the word I'm looking for? Out of history and reputation, they were still ranked in the top 20 all year. Arizona was, but they got a 9 seed in the tournament and lost to Seton Hall. But there was a point where they were playing Stanford at home that year, and Stanford, I think, won by 12. I want to say 12 points. I think it was like a 6-point game going into the last 2 minutes, and then Stanford won by 12, something like that, because of free throws or whatever. I might be wrong on that. I might have it backward. It might have been a deeper deficit, and then they cut it down. But the point is, forgive my rambling here, at that time, that was 21 years into Lute Olson's tenure here, and that was only the second worst home loss he'd ever faced in McHale.
After years of fine print contracts and getting ripped off by big wireless providers, if we've learned anything, it's that there's always a catch. So when I first heard that Mint Mobile offers premium wireless starting at just $15 a month, I thought, what's the catch? But after talking to them and using their service, it all made sense. There isn't one. Mint Mobile's secret sauce is that they're the first company to sell wireless service online only. They cut out the cost of retail stores and pass those sweet savings directly to you. For anyone who hates their phone bill, Mint Mobile offers premium wireless for just $15 a month. I was hesitant about having to get a new phone and a new phone number, but with Mint, you can use your own phone with any Mint Mobile plan and keep your same phone and your same phone number along with all of your existing contacts. Mint Mobile gives you the best rate whether you're buying for one or for a family, and at Mint, families start at 2 lines. All plans come with unlimited talk and text plus high-speed data delivered on the nation's largest 5G network. Switch to Mint Mobile and get premium wireless service starting at just $15 a month. To get your new wireless plan for just $15 a month and to get the plans shipped to your door for free, go to mintmobile.com/waypoint. That is mintmobile.com/waypoint. Cut your wireless bill to $15 a month at mintmobile.com/waypoint.
12 points. So again, I know I'm equating home to road, which is incomparable, but at the same time, logically, you're talking about teams playing basketball and how many points do they win or lose by. So 12 points was the second worst home loss they've ever faced. Yes, he had a couple of bad road losses, but to bring it to today, I think that loss against Buffalo, because of how it happened, the fact they got beat by 23 points in the second half alone of that game, gave up practically 90. That is not anything anyone has seen as an Arizona fan, especially seen of a team that's been good. I mean, again, we saw it with the first year of the Sean Miller era when they were pretty bad. We saw it with the Paper Tigers of the Russ Pennell team. It's happened a couple times in the Lute Olson era, but not like that. Yeah. That was pretty nuts. The other one I think that I'm not giving enough credit for, if I'm not mistaken, was 98. I think they lost by like 28 to Utah or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, in the tournament.
Yeah, that was kind of repeat as champions. That was Andre Miller.
Right. And so that one, I think, from a shocking standpoint, gets right up there. So yeah, they lost by 25 to Utah to get to the Final Four. That shouldn't have happened. But at the same time, I think once you get into the Sweet 16 or the Elite Eight, you're down to a lot of variables that can factor a game, and 25 points isn't a variable, but to me, it's a lot different than the first or second rounds when you really should be seeded. As much as Arizona supposedly got hosed with their seeding and their location or whatever, it's still a 4 versus a 13. That should, in theory, be a big, big difference, and it just wasn't.
One of the interesting dynamic that I see here is you still have seniors that are loyal to the program. They want to play at Arizona, and so they're going to stay all 4 years. And
4-year seniors, you're saying?
Yeah, so you still have people want to go to Arizona to play at Arizona, and they're good. But then you also have to measure and meld that together with the people who are going to go the one and done. And so as far as your team chemistry, when you're in the locker room and you're saying, I love putting on the Arizona uniform because I've loved this school and I'm so happy to be here. The guy that's sitting over there, we all know he's going to be gone as soon as the season's over. And we know this guy's thinking about it. Like, what does that do to the dynamic? And how, as a coach, do you handle that, hey, team, we need to rally around each other. We need to live and we need to fight for each other when everyone has different things. I'm using Arizona for now to get to where I was or to get to where I want to be. And other people are just so happy to be there because of where they were. And you see it with Duke. They have just enough of that older guard, and Krzyzewski's done a great job of adopting the one and dones, use the one and dones, but also still have the true to the Duke program. And I think at times it's been hard for Arizona, and I think that's why you see sometimes the psychology of that team. If you're a 13 seed, it's you and your program, and a lot of these good teams they have players who have been in the program and who have been underappreciated for everything. And so now it's everything on the line with these brothers that are on their team, that they've adopted that family sort of atmosphere. And can you really get that same sort of family atmosphere when everyone has different agendas? And the one and done thing is that just is what it is. But I wonder if
it is what it is. But what's interesting, and I don't know how or why, I think there are cases. Take Duke, for example. You mentioned Duke. I mean, and this is not meant to dive into the psyche or anything like that of Grayson Allen, but it's really fascinating that, I mean, he was a top 20 recruit. He was a 5-star recruit, top 20 in the country, signed with Duke, McDonald's All-American, and yet he's been there for 4 years. And so for some reason, Krzyzewski has been able to, and even Roy Williams to some extent, the Tyler Hansboroughs, recruit these players that everybody knows are really good, and somehow they stick around for 4 years or even 2 or 3 years. I think Alonzo Trier being at Arizona for 3 years is insane, except for the fact that he's been off the court so much for various reasons that he had no choice but to stick around. It's really interesting to me that some of these programs that are perpetually competitive in terms of Elite Eights, Final Fours, et cetera, are able to get these guys that stick around. I mean, Joel Berry at North Carolina, I think, is another one.
Yeah.
I think so. I'm going to look it up.
You look at who is telling these guys, because Arizona has had some people who have left early for the NBA who we know, like, dude, that's not going to work out. Brandon Ashley, I love that guy.
Joel Berry, by the way, a 5-star recruit, number 1 recruit out of Florida, 17th overall, according to the ESPN 100 4 years ago. And he's been at North Carolina for 4 years. So there's no, I don't know why these guys that, and he was being recruited by, Kansas, Florida, North Carolina, Maryland. I mean, we're not talking Michigan State, we're not talking low-level programs. And signed with North Carolina, took them to a championship last year, and is still there. I mean, there's something weird about why these other programs are able to do this, but Arizona is going after and I'm not knocking the guys at all, and I'm not knocking them leaving. Don't get me wrong. I have a completely different viewpoint on whether they should have left or not, and I think they had every right to. But when you're looking at your Aaron Gordons and Stanley Johnsons and DeAndre Aytons, I mean, those are the 3 big ones over the last few years. But then to your point, your Kobe Simmonses and your Chance Comanches and your Brandon Ashleys and your what's his name? Another forward a couple of years ago that barely played.
Jarrett. Who's on the same class?
Grant Jarrett. Yeah, and your Grant Jarrett's like, what is it with those guys? If they stuck around, if Kobe Simmons stuck around, he would have been so important to that team this year. Yeah. So important that I honestly think he might have figured out a way to get in the starting lineup somehow.
Guard depth, really athletic guy. Yeah, who's telling them that, well, you need to leave because they have this class. This guy is going to come in and he's going to steal time from you.
Well, that's what's fascinating. That's the fascinating part is what do you do as a coach? And I don't know this. I'm totally out of my element on this, and so I'm admitting it. But what do you do as a coach? Do you go and recruit five stars every year, knowing it's going to push some of the last year's guys to leave? Or do you recruit heavily 2 of them to just fill gaps and hope you have this sort of evolutionary role, And I don't know. I don't know the answer.
Yeah. It's a weird, there's no, it's not a knock on the program. It's just an interesting, observable thing. And I don't know. I don't know what to do with that.
And to give Coach K credit, not that he needs more credit for anything, he's one of the best ever, if not the best, but to give him credit, he's evolved from this. He used to be very adamantly, I'm not taking one and done players or guys that aren't going to stay for 4 yeyears. I want to say, was it Corey Maggette after 01, which is a long time ago now. But I think Corey Maggette was the first Duke player ever to declare early for the draft.
I thought it was, I think Maggette was like 99, I think, because you had Maggette and you had Eldon Brand.
Yeah.
And then that 2001 team was Boozer and Jay Williams.
Yeah. Right. And Dunleavy and Battier. God, how deep was that team?
Dude, and the Arizona team too, man. You still got Jefferson. He was in the league until 2 years ago, last year.
He's still playing.
He's still playing this year? Man, that guy.
I believe so. Maybe I'm wrong.
The longevity of some of those guys. He was still in the league.
He's on the Nuggets, but he's not playing much.
Yeah. Iguodala
he's averaging 8 minutes a game for the Nuggets this year.
Recruited my senior year. Was there when you were there, Andre Iguodala. I mean, he's been around forever. Channing Frye. He was there I think that was that freshman class, maybe the year after. But yeah, dude.
2, 3, 01, 02.
Yeah,
was Channing Frye.
Some of those, because
Salim Stoudemire, Channing Frye, Isaiah Fox were all the same year.
That's right. Yeah, and the longevity of some of those guys and some of the, you just had a great mix. But after 0-1, all 5 starters declared for the draft, and then some came back. Gardner came back because he didn't sign. Yeah.
I forgot about marketing when I was mentioning the recent crop of one and dones that are. I mean, there's been one a year for what, 4 straight years.
Yeah. There's been one for every Elite 8, and if there isn't one, that's the time in between, and that's the Sweet 16 or the NIT visit that we were on. But let's bridge over to we got about 45 minutes on Arizona basketball. Let's talk about, as director of student media, as all this is happening.
Has it really been 44 minutes already? Oh my gosh. Time
flies when you're talking Arizona basketball. But
how long are we going?
Whatever, man. This is
okay. Good.
It's the internet, man. We don't have. It's not an hour show. We don't have to do anything. Talk about some of the challenges and the ethics in reporting. And this isn't just specific to covering what was going on with Arizona basketball this year, but just journalism in general. What are some of the lessons? What are some of the things that you found with the employees at the Daily Wildcat that they've had to deal with or navigate with in the modern journalism world?
I mean, some of this is really low-hanging fruit and obvious, but I think the speed factor is one of them. And so there's a few things. There's the speed factor, which is what we've all seen as the internet has proliferated, which is got to get something up now. And at this teaching element, I'm starting to get away from the idea of we need more traffic, we need more page views. Yeah, it'd be great, but it's not going to save us financially to get more page views and sell more ads online and all the other stuff that's totally on the other side of the equation. So I would rather have them sit back and just wait a second and analyze not analyze in terms of their writing, but analyze in terms of what's going on before just reactionarily posting something or, oh, the Daily Star is reporting XXX, or using other sourcing to create stories. That's the stuff that gets to me. And I don't stop them. I don't have the right to do that in my role. I mean, I advise them, I help them, but they're independent in their decision making. But at the same time, I also think that there's an opportunity to be a little bit different. And this is the nature, and this isn't not a knock on any individual. I don't think it's an individual person saying do this. So I don't want it to come off like I'm attacking Miller or SIDs or the athletic directors or anything like that when I say this. But the desire to close off access, and I hate that word because everybody thinks, oh, the media is just whining about access. Well, no, the media is whining about access because the public doesn't have access. The desire to close off access at major college programs in the last 10 to 12 years is incredibly problematic, disconcerting, and really doesn't help the programs, even though they think controlling the message does. And so there's definitely, I mean, no one's ever closed off access in terms of, oh, you can't cover games or you can't do this, but there's very controlled levels of, I mean, for many weeks, the only player that media was allowed to talk to after home games at U of A basketball games was Dusan Ristic. And I love Dusan, but Dusan, English is a second language. And he's great at it. He's evolved incredibly over 4 years, but it's a different element than talking to some of these other guys. And part of me thinks that's calculated, that's done by design, because they know that he's going to be able to spit out exactly what they want him to say, nothing less, nothing more. And so you have every media outlet covering the exact same quotes, the exact same thing. There's zero one-on-ones. There's very little ability to ask a question beyond what everyone in the room heard. And so next thing you know, the next day, every story's coming out and they're the exact same thing. Maybe a different spin based on who wrote it or talked about it, or if it was TV or newsprint or online, but more or less they're using the exact same information, same thing. Well, that's controlling the message. And it's something Greg Byrne, when he was here at Arizona and now at Alabama, I'm assuming, was the master at, for better or worse. A lot of people loved it, that he was so out there and open. I was skeptical of it. I am not accusing him of anything as a person or anything like that. I know there are a lot of people that connect him to a lot of the problems that the U of A athletics department has, but that's not even my point here. My point is that he was able to put this face of, I'm going to be out there in public and I'm going to wear my red pants to a football game and I'm going to put my weekly newsletter out on Wednesdays and I'm going to give people prizes and I'm going to announce coaching hires on Twitter. And again, I don't think it was even malicious, but that says we're this public sphere and we're out there, when the reality was it was brilliant mind control of what the public saw about the program and how much they could actually dive in and see. So journalistically, I keep pushing the students that I'm working with to do something different, find a different way to tackle something. And some of it works, some of it doesn't, and some of it works and still needs to evolve. And the hard part is a lot of it ends up being speculation and supposition. And that's the part that I think as stereotypical journalism participators, we struggle with, right? Which is, we can pontificate on a podcast here about what's ailing Arizona basketball. But the reality is if we're covering day-to-day journalism as a beat writer for this team, that's not our job. But the beat writers, both at the college level and the professional level, have kind of been put into that situation where they have to do a lot more guessing of what's actually going on because they aren't in the room like we used to be. And again, by in the room, I don't mean digging into negative things. And I know this year there could be a million negative things to dig into, but just being there to learn who these players are and what makes them tick. I mean, I started sending about 2-3 years ago, I started budgeting a lot more. We don't have the money in our budget, but I started figuring it out, budgeting a lot more money to send a lot more people to the tournaments. And part of my disappointment of Arizona going to Boise this year for basketball was because if it was San Diego, I had a 3-bedroom, it sounds expensive, but it was cheaper than separate hotel rooms. I had a 3-bedroom suite rented at a Courtyard Marriott so that we could send literally 8 people to cover the NCAA tournament for TV, radio, and the newspaper, because it's the first time you really get to do your job, which is talk to people and get good stories. The Pac-12 tournament and the NCAA tournament are the first time all year that the locker rooms are open. And these days, they don't get more than one player during Monday media sessions in McHale Center. They can ask, and to be fair, the SIDs and the athletic department do grant interviews a lot. But it's not the norm where every week you can go say, hey, I thought about this. I want to do a profile on the 12th guy on the back of the bench. And so the Pac-12 tournament and then the NCAAs are the first time you get to do that. And just talking to some of the people I know in journalism, my students and otherwise, they've learned so much about DeAndre Ayton, Raleigh Alkins, and some of these guys this week alone, even though they played one game and flamed out, than they did in years, because they were able to actually have legitimate conversations and ask them funny things about their lives and that kind of stuff. So I think I got sidetracked on the actual question here, but the gist of it being that it's a lot harder for them to do their jobs, which I think is good. I think that's good that they're challenged, but it's also, I don't know if they, because of what they see out there and the punditry and the embracing debate and, the middle day lineup on ESPN of your around the horns and PTIs and so forth, the difference of being a columnist and a reporter has blurred a lot. I think actually, to shift to a whole other issue, that's a lot of the criticism that is being levied at the Greg Hansons of the world, is people not really understanding his role as an opinionist versus a reporter. And it's, with Hanson's reporting on this Arizona basketball scandal, and we'll get into that, I'm sure. But so anyway, I think I kind of danced around the question a little bit. It's different. It's very different. And I'm learning every day how to better help them navigate, because I don't know the right answers. What I can say is I believe Arizona, from a basketball and football standpoint in particular, because the other sports are great. That's why I tell my students, own the other sports. I don't like calling them non-rev sports or smaller sports. Own them. Mike Candrea in the softball program, tons of access. Jay Johnson in the baseball program, tons of access. Track and gymnastics and soccer would kill to have 2 or 3 reporters and photogs at every single practicing game. So do it, do it. Be there and use that and that's no different than when we were there, obviously. But at the same time, you're going to get better as a journalist covering those than you are covering basketball. The problem is your resume and your clips have to show covering these so-called bigger beats, because wrongly, that's what the outlets hiring are looking for. They'd argue otherwise, but I think they want to see people that can handle themselves in public and handle themselves in these bigger environments, and that they can trust, can know how to throw elbows in the media scrums with the big boys. So I think that's why they look at that stuff. And even in
one of my favorite things that I wrote, we went to the tennis, and there was no one there. There was no dog. And the coaches, so it was really cool to just be there. And And to cover Arizona tennis, just to see what they were all about and how much fun they had and how good they were, but without any sort of, there was no noticing. And it's not that I wanted to advocate for them as a journalist, because you have to keep separate. So it's not me promoting the sport of these people, but to tell their stories. And I think if you can tell someone's story, then the fans are more connected to the team rather than just the outcome. And if you can look at the roster, it's, oh, do you know that dude's story? That's crazy. I read about this. And so when you talk about access, there's always a couple stories that people write, and Bruce or Greg Hansen, they're saying this kid has such a wonderful personality, and he's such great charisma, but you haven't been able to see the charisma because they've been hidden away. But as a fan, if you feel more connected to the players, if you're reading these features about what people have been through and what they've done and what type of person they are, then you're a fan of them. You're not just a fan of whether or not they win or lose. And so I would agree.
I totally agree. And I think and looking at it, I agree on again, using words I don't like, but the non-revenue sports, especially, and into your point about you don't advocate for the players. I think what's weird about that is I'm okay saying do it, advocate for them on a case by case basis, meaning that if you know that kid has a really cool story, advocate that kid's story in the sense of your work is advocating for it because you're deciding as a journalist, this is worth sharing with the world. And not that you're saying, hey, you guys all need to like this guy. No, your work should speak for itself. And by yours, I don't mean yours. I mean, the proverbial you. And so I'm okay admitting that it's okay being human and saying, wow, that's a really neat kid. I want to share that with everybody. And these non-revenue sports have tons of them. And even coaches that used to be athletes at the school, and even other people connected to programs. There's tons of cool stories about these guys. And and they're undercovered. They're absolutely undercovered. And that's why I advocate for our program to go hog wild covering those, because I think it also allows you to have a better appreciation for things other than men's basketball and football too. I have a soft spot in my heart for gymnastics at U of A because that was the first beat that I ever covered. I came in and started in January, and it was okay, go cover the Gym Cats. And there was something so cool about watching them compete in McHale, even if, and this is not meant to disparage and just making an observation, even if there was only 500 people there, and being down on the floor and interviewing them and then going to practice and learning about a sport I had no idea about. So I have a little bit of a soft spot for it. And I think that's not a bad thing and it's allowed me to be a better analysis of what are we doing when we're talking about football and men's basketball. We can be fans and think it's great, but why is the idolatry of these so gigantic? And the thing you said about the fans connecting with players, I think is the biggest thing. I think when the athletic departments, and I'm saying departments because I don't think it's fair to single out U of A on this. I think it's across the country, and I don't want to single out individuals here. Not because I don't think they've made decisions, but I think it's a cultural thing across major college sports. When they do this around the country, I think they're missing an opportunity to better connect these athletes with the fans. I'm not lacking in confidence saying that I'm probably in the 5th percentile of U of A football fans in terms of my knowledge of the program. And if you ask me right now to name 10 players on next year's roster, I couldn't do it. I couldn't do it. I don't cover the team on a day-to-day basis. I go to just about every game, and if I don't go, I'm watching. I mean, I went to every game for 14 years, and I got really turned off when my ticket prices got skyrocketed, raised after the Fiesta Bowl season a couple years ago, and I had to decide, do I keep basketball or football? I couldn't do both, and I kept basketball. But I still go to enough games, at minimum 2 or 3 a year, and I'm watching every game at home. Which I think is easier to actually learn who these players are and connect with them because you're watching and get all the graphic packages from ESPN and Pac-12 Network and Fox Sports and so forth. But at the same time, I can't name 10 players. I don't know if I can name 5. I probably could name 5 who are coming back and on next year's team. So there's something to that other than Khalil Tate, I don't have any connection to anybody as a fan who works on camp, who's an alum, who covered the team for years, traveled with the team covering them. works on campus, cares about the nitty gritty of stats and info and the deep dive stuff, and actually is helping coach my students in their jobs, interviewing them. And I can't name 5 to 10 players. So I think when we talk about attendance at Arizona Stadium being down, there's 2 major factors. There's one that's bigger than the other. It's a fan experience that needs heavy overhaul. That upper deck, which you've sat in, I'm sure, when you're at times, is really, really bad. I don't want to oversell it. I don't want to undersell it. It's just a really bad experience. And it's not fun. You got these bugs flying around that are like heat-seeking missiles about to take your head off, and the size of softballs, and up by the light stanchions. And you're in another hemisphere, and half the season it's hot, and it's just not comfortable, and it's no chair backs. It's benches, and it's a bad environment for relatively cheap, but still costly for a family of 4 event. And so I think that's half the battle, is you got to make it more exciting and entertaining and comfortable for people to come to games. The second half of it, though, is that you have to create a connection between these athletes. And this is getting away from the journalism part, but I think it all is connected. The athletic departments have to create a connection between these athletes and the community. And I think they do a really good job at it on the non-revenue sports like softball. The diehards, the couple thousand people that are diehards at Hillenbrand, they know every one of those players, and they know who their parents are, and they know who, because they can get close to the action. Well, if you physically can't get close to it in McHale or Arizona Stadium, then that means there has to be other things done to allow that. And I think they've choked that off here at Arizona. I think at other programs, at other major programs, by choking off the media's access on a day-to-day basis to different stories and different players. And by stories, I mean the stories of these players. And so anyway, I know I keep going on complete sidetrack tangents, but I don't think that as journalists, they should necessarily there's anything they can do to change that other than just trying to find new ways to tell these stories. But I do think it's a mistake that's hurting everyone involved. So to go back to your earlier point, that's exactly why I agree with you. And I really, really advocate to still have sort of the hierarchical system that when you come in to work here, take a beat that's less desirable, so to speak, because you're going to realize real fast that you have flexibility. You don't have to be perfect all the time. You can learn and grow yourself, and you can tell some really good stories about some really cool people.
The first assignment I had was to do just a brief recap of cross country. And I think it was Tara Chapman, or Chaplin or something like that. And so I called her, and I didn't have any questions written out. And I could see that Ryan Finley was just sitting near and just kind of, okay, how's this new guy going to do? Because I had no journalism experience. I was currently in like the journalism 101 class.
Who'd you take that with?
Johnson.
I told Jim we were going to mention his name at some point today.
So I was,
that was my first class too. By the way, plug for his new book, The Black Bruins, about UCLA's 4 African-American football players back in the 40s, I want to say, Jackie Robinson and Tom Bradley and a couple of these guys. Tom Bradley ended up being the mayor of LA. I haven't read it yet, but I'm really excited.
He's great. I mean, I loved his classes. I got a C in one of them, but I think it wasn't really indicative of the fact that I gained so much knowledge, and it was, I earned the C in that class, but I learned a ton. But anyway, so I'm in that class. I get the job with the Wildcat, and I call, and I just got to ask her a couple questions about what's going on, and I had no idea what I was doing. I figured all I got to do is just talk, right? Just ask, hey, how do you feel? Type questions. And, I was miserable. So then I went to, they gave me the beat. I think Finley just probably laughed at me and thought, well, every new reporter goes through that. But my beat was lacrosse. And so I went to lacrosse practice and just watched it and wrote a lead. And the lead was Mickey Mouse Felton saying, get some water, it's hotter than you think. And I used that as my lead, and Ryan Finley at the sports meetings gave me the game ball for the best lead of the week. And I thought, dude, that's awesome. It just made sense to me to go there and just kind of observe. But you talk about, first sort of memories. And I always had that. The Arizona lacrosse team was I was definitely connected with them because that was my first beat. And that was the first acknowledgement that I enjoyed going and finding and observing and writing these stories about these people, because that was a very underappreciated sport. But I was told to pimp my beat, and I remember writing a lot about lacrosse because the more you write, the more money you made. So that also made sense. And there were a couple of lacrosse players that I saw that they would buy me beer when we were out at Dirtbags or wherever, because like, dude, thanks for the coverage, man. Like, girls know who I am. I'm like, all right. And so you could maybe fill in some gaps there. But it was funny covering lacrosse and how much fun it was to. Those guys were so appreciative because, they're not the big guys on campus, but they crushed it. In club lacrosse, they were so good. So soft spot for them. Do you know what ever happened to Mickey Mouse Felton?
I don't. I know that right around the same time, I want to say that Mickey Miles Felton, the three big club sports, Mickey Miles Felton, Leo Golombiewski with the Ice Cats hockey program, and Dave Sitton with the rugby team, all sort of retired within a couple year period of doing that. And I don't know what's up. I don't know anything about Mickey Mouse Felton or even Golombiewski. I talked to Leo a couple of years ago after he had already sort of, that was a really contentious thing. And if I'm not mistaken, and I don't want to overspeak here, I think the lacrosse program, the separation of him from the program was kind of contentious too, where the students kind of, I don't know if they saw it in lacrosse first and the hockey team followed suit, or the hockey team saw it and the lacrosse team followed suit, but it was the players kind of decided, look, we need to make this more about the university and the players rather than the coaches, who had these sort of larger than life personalities. And rugby, I don't think was like that. I think Sitton got to the point where it was time, and the intramural field that they built on an old parking lot right next to the rec center, across the street from the football stadium, is now the Dave Sitton recreational field. And then he obviously was a play-by-play announcer for many, many years for U of A stuff, ran for, I want to say, I don't know what office is, but some sort of Congress or state Senate or something. But he ended up passing away a couple of years ago, I believe, from cancer, like 2 years ago or so. But no, I don't know. Do you know the answer? Was that you actually asking, or do you know?
I knew about Sitton, but as far as Mickey Miles Felton, I didn't. I knew that things had, it was very eccentric, and he was kind of the lax cats, but as the players wanted, like you said, to connect more with the university. And I think shortly after I covered, I think that may have been within a year or two of the separation. But yeah, I had no idea about lacrosse now or about Mickey Miles himself. But
I think, it says 2013 was when he actually, so I guess he was there a while after. I thought it was more further back. I'm seeing some stuff that says, I think like 13 was his 37 years with the program and stuff. But he, and I'm not saying any of it to disparage him or anything. I don't know the backstory, but I know that it just evolved. I mean, they're more U of A teams now than they are, the hockey program too, than they are these separate sort of independent kind of things.
I love it. He was great. He was always really happy and excited, and that was a fun experience for sure. So what else you got as far as ethics wise, or you want to get into kind of the due process? You giving people pass versus due process in the interest of covering things as soon as they break? Are we preventing people from having due process? And that's not necessarily just in sports, but in general. Is journalistic, is the way we report things preventing people from having the right to have things play out, or is the knee-jerk reaction to have them removed because of what stories are coming out? Like, where are you at on that?
I mean, I think that I'll probably get hammered on both sides of the aisle on this for people that hear this, but I think that's kind of just the breaks, meaning that you're always going to have people dig into something and report on it. And that sometimes creates the due process in a way for either side of an argument, or one of many sides if it's a multi-sided argument. And I think a good example is the Sean Miller situation. The forgetting for 10 seconds that ESPN had many errors, or potentially had many errors in their coverage. Let's just say their coverage was 100% correct. Well, is that unfair to Miller that they went and uncovered this? No, it's even though he's not getting due process because they're throwing it out there. No, it's the reaction of it that comes from it. I don't have to agree with what Greg Hansen wrote in his Friday column that night, where he called for Miller's ouster, to agree that he deserves, as a journalist, if you want to call him as a columnist or an opinionist, that he has the right to that opinion in that space. And I would say that for anybody. But I think this is where the problem lies, and we said this earlier, is that the difference between reporting and opinion is so blurred, And on this entire case, that's been the biggest concern for me, is that what's been reported and what's been opinionized has so crossed paths that we can get into the nitty gritty of, did somebody break an ethical line or code, or did somebody, just completely throw journalism ethics and norms out the window. I mean, that's fair to argue, but I'd rather sit there and really discuss the fact that I don't think as an audience, we know the difference. And that's pretty frightening. It's really frightening, to the point that I really question, should there be opinion pages in newspapers? I mean, that's crazy to think about. Of course I think they should. But at the same time, what can we do and I had a friend bring this up the other day, and he said, what could we do to make it so much more obvious on a website what's an opinion piece? I hate the word column. What's an opinion piece and what's not? And he's right. Like, should there be a different color scheme, a banner at the top that says, this is an opinion, with a disclaimer underneath that says, this is the opinion of the writer. This is not a typically reported and sourced, news piece. Please understand that when you read it. Just be so blatant about what the difference is. And I think that's a big part of this due process argument, because a lot of what's being discussed is the opinion of people who have experience and have proven their track record and their experience for decades, a la Greg Hansen in Tucson, mixed with and I'm not saying he's not doing actual reporting, but mixed with the direct actual reporting done by journalists surrounding these topics. And the fans can't separate the two. In a lot of cases, I don't think they want to separate the two. And so it's become very difficult. And I've gotten into it with some folks, on social media and stuff like that. And I'll give them credit. I mean, they take me down every time. I'm not good at arguing on social media. I get burnt all the time, and yet I keep going back and touching the oven. But they, some of them are attached to the so-called fan sites. I think that's unfair of a label to them for the work they put in. But the sites that are more meant to prop up the program and promote its viability. So they're not typically journalistically sound, but yet they're arguing journalism ethics. And I'm not saying they're wrong. They make a lot of really great points, but it's created this weird dynamic that here you have these people that are just their mere existence as an organization may not be rooted in journalism, yet they're the ones, claiming, journalistic problems with what people are doing. I mean, it's really, really a whole different rodeo.
Well, it's teaching at the high school level, because kids who have no journalism background, but they have, they're used to reading something. They go online and they accidentally read so much more than they really know, because there's always something that's the clickbait type. And like you said, with the newspapers, you used to flip through the newspaper, find the opinion section, but now digitally you don't have that. And so everything on the front page, you're going to have opinion, you're going to have everything. So if there was some sort of color scheme to help that, but people want to read things that are provocative. The objective writing of news is pretty boring. So then in order to enhance things, you have your straightforward news lead, but you also have kind of a featurey sort of lead. And then you have this, I tell my journalism students that there are three basic sort of, right? You have your news, you have your opinion, and then you have the feature. But there's examples of, they all kind of mesh together. There's the first person type of feature that's written kind of because it's your opinion. Everything is so different, and it's really puts us in a difficult spot, because when this first comes out, a lot of people in Tucson, I'm sure, were thinking, well, what does Greg Hansen think about this? And I want to read what he's going to say. Jay Billis was put on the spot on College Game Day, and so he made those comments about his career is over, which again was his opinion. So if people want to, play that over again, he still got to coach. And Jay Billis, you're Well, he was asked to comment on that, and the knee-jerk reaction is what it is. If he were to sit there and say, "Let's wait for the facts to come out," he would have been ridiculed as, "Why is he protecting Sean Miller? Why does he have a different?"
Yeah. So I totally agree with you.
It's a hard, difficult position for him to be in, and same thing with Greg Hansen. I think he's definitely a mentor of mine when I was growing up. Just the way he handled things, he and Bruce, and just how hard they worked and how dedicated.
Well, and that's why I'm not quick to vilify. I am not afraid to say, and I don't think I would ever have the audience to say this to Greg. I don't know Greg personally. I know him, but I mean, I don't have an audience to say this to him. I know him. I know Tyler. I mean, I know their family a little bit, but not very much. Very little. Very little. Mostly in social media circles, almost entirely. But the point I bring that up with this is that. I'm the same way as you. I think that his history and his track record, and then there's a lot of people saying, well, his track record isn't that great if you really look at it. No, his track record has been really worth following for decades. And the reality is that just because I'm giving someone the ability as a reader, I'm just going to say I'm a reader who cares about journalism, not even what I do in my job or anything. I'm giving someone a so-called pass, which is not what I'm doing, but giving someone a so-called pass to not have their career go up in flames because of one thing that very rightly could be construed as a mistake, any which way you take it, i.e. going hog wild in that column or going on the radio and saying what he said about rhymes with look, for who possibly gave him the information and having to backtrack that and stuff. I'm sorry. This might get me shot down by the ethical purists in journalism, but one bad week does not ruin a 40-year career to me. It doesn't. It just doesn't. And that doesn't mean I agree with what he did. It means I think it's abhorrent. Potentially. I don't think he is abhorrent. I think what potentially happened there is, I don't think the column personally is an issue. I don't. I liked what he said in his retort where he said, I think I should have said if proven to be true. And that sounds, easy to say in hindsight, but he's right. The qualifier matters to be fair to that due process thing. But anyway, the point I bring up on all this is that I don't know. I don't know if I'm just compassionate to human error because I've had my own, but I don't think it's worthy of somebody completely having everything they've ever done erased, especially when, and this is where I got into it with people yesterday. This is really in the weeds, but when Hansen went on the radio show in Phoenix and made the comment where he said, "Oh yeah, this is the information I got and it's from someone whose name rhymes with look," what he ended up saying, forget where he got it for 5 seconds. What he ended up saying, which was that there was a conversation between Miller and Dawkins that somehow someone offered money for a player and that player was not DeAndre Ayton and that ESPN got a lot wrong with its report. Sean Miller actually confirmed every ounce of that the next day in his press conference, with the caveat, to be fair to Miller, that I did nothing wrong. I did not take the money. I do not want the money. Somebody offered it and I said no. So fair enough to Miller. That's what he's saying. That's the due process part we're talking about. Miller had his day to say what he thinks, but he confirmed every ounce of what Hansen said, except where Hansen got the information. So what are we arguing here? Are we arguing the actual correctness of the info and the data, or are we arguing the source? And if we're arguing the source, fine, because if he didn't get it from Book Richardson or people in that ilk, then that's a problem that he said he did. And if he did, and now he can't say it, who knows? I don't know what the situation is. I think he got it from somewhere, and I think he had to backtrack for who knows what reason. But that's not even the point. The bigger point being that there is a problem with us very quickly writing off an entirety of something just because some of it's not necessarily right on. Same thing with that ESPN report. Okay, so they got the player wrong. That's a huge deal, and that's really unfair to DeAndre Ayton if that's the truth, that they got the player wrong. But if there's still a conversation happening over a potential $100,000 payment, potential doesn't mean it happened. I even saw that this past week. The Arizona Republic, and I don't want to call people out, but the Arizona Republic, I struggle with this because I am not a media critic, because I was for a long time. At least I felt like I wanted to be on social media. And then I realized, you know what? Glass houses, man, this is a hard business. So I'm a lot harder today than people realize. And so I've really stopped and started sort of more championing for the efforts that media outlets are putting. But I saw, to be fair to this argument, I saw a column in the Republic or on AZ Central yesterday, and it flat out said that Sean Miller was caught on tape talking about, I don't know how it worded it, but it completely bastardized what the report said, which was that Miller was on tape talking about a possible payment to a player. And it basically said Miller paid a player, was the gist of what the column had said. And that's the problem too, is that the telephone game is allowing things to just get so out of whack because one person says one thing and then it gets taken and ripped to shreds and so forth. So anyway, once again, I'm getting sidetracked and rambled.
One of the big problems with this too is people want to know what this person thinks and what side they're on. So if someone were to listen to this, they would say, "Oh, Brett Fera said this about this, and he means this, or he's against." No, there's a huge difference between people discussing an issue and taking sides.
I want what Sean Miller said in his Thursday press conference to be 100% right. I want it to be right. I want him to be proven right. Professionally, I'm skeptical if he will. That's it. That's my side on this. From a journalistic standpoint, I don't think a columnist or an opinion. I like the word opinionist. It's not really a real word, I don't think, but I don't think column means anything anymore. Column used to be the column inches on a page and you got the same space every day, and that's evolved. So an opinionist or a commentator made a statement that said Sean Miller should be canned. Well, there are a lot of people that did. John Wilner, who covers the Pac-12 for the Mercury News and the Bay Area News Group for decades, who still is very well known nationally, he said it this week. He doesn't think Arizona should stick with Sean Miller. Well, what's the difference? Because he's not a Tucson guy, it doesn't matter. We don't care, that he said it, but we care that Hansen said it. Like, no. I mean, the reality is that actually that is the answer. I think that people don't know and don't go after someone that's 2,000 miles away. They care about the person in their backyard, not supporting their team. But this goes to what we said earlier about the fickle nature when we talked at the beginning of the conversation about the flame out this week for the basketball program in Boise. That the fickle nature of these fans is really unhealthy. And I feel for them. I mean that in the sense of sympathy, because I choose not to live and die with what these programs do. I'll tell you, from my job got a little easier with Arizona losing because I don't have to play a travel agent anymore and trying to get kids across the country. But at the same time, it's the fickle nature of we hate Sean Miller. He's underachieving, to don't talk about my little brother like that. That's the attitude people kind of took when this all started, was nobody picks on my little brother but me. And that's sort of the logic that they had, which was, I'm allowed to say he's a crappy coach, but you can't say anything bad about him and that he needs to go away. That's for me. And that's just crazy. That's just crazy.
I remember when I was talking about being closest to the program and being excited about it, when you're in college and the players, it makes it so different. I was an athlete, and so I had classes with a lot of football and basketball players. Yeah. I remember Jason Gardner came up to me after they had a loss at USC where he was called for a travel in the last minute. And he came into class and he said, "Do you think I traveled?" And I said, "Man, I don't think so, but I'm not sure who's talking there." And he kind of smiled and acknowledged it. But when the people, it's kind of a hard dynamic to keep totally objective and to separate yourself, because these players and they're almost friends. Like your circle of friends are kind of there. But now that I'm removed from it, like you said, I'm not as crushed at all. And obviously living in Alaska too, like there's a lot of stuff that I want to do. It's been sunny and warm. And so I'm going out in my boat and setting crab pots and, trying to hunt grouse, things like that. So I'm not living and dying by the March Madness tournament, especially not Arizona basketball. Yeah. It's something I'm definitely interested in still, but it's not my calendar, and my life is not dictated about how the football team does or a basketball team. And I no longer say, well, at least we have softball, because even that's kind of sad. But we won't even get into that. That's a whole other hour.
I think to me, I get it. I get it entirely, and I think I'm in a very. I think you're in a unique spot, and I'm in a differently unique spot. That I am still very close geographically to all this stuff, and that's actually probably been the worst thing for my fandom as an alum, a two-time alum, somebody who lived and breathed red and blue for a long time. I love the university I work at. I don't know how much I love the athletic department. It doesn't mean the athletes. I think the athletes are incredible. Even the one and dones that, and the students that might struggle academically and are here for one reason, and that's to play sports. This is not about the athletes whatsoever. The athletes I have incredible respect for. We're lucky enough this year that the sports desk at the Wildcat actually has 3 athletes on it. Or it has at various times. I mean, some have had to pull away because of their sport and stuff, but just talking to them has been really eye-opening about their experiences and the honesty they share about even the not so great aspects of their experiences. And the fact they're all trying to do the same thing and get careers. I mean, we had Zach Werlinger, who was one of the backup quarterbacks. As soon as football season was over, he walked into our broadcast advisor's office and said, "Hey, I've been doing this stuff for the athletic department, interviewing players because I'm good on camera and stuff. Can I get some time with UATV? Because I did this for 4 years or 3.5 years. I played football, and now football's over, and I got 6 months to get a job." And so, that's the part. These are real. I will go out on a limb and say that the majority. I mean, it's not on a limb, obviously. The majority of these athletes are good kids, are working their tail off, know what hard work is like more than anything I knew as a college student. Jesus. I mean, the amount of time they have to put into various ventures to get whatever they're doing done, both in school and in sports. And that's not a defense of the amateur NCAA student athlete model when I say that. But the reality is what I think is forgotten about that discussion is that for most of them, they are student athletes. It's that NCAA, I don't buy it, I hate it, but it's that NCAA commercial that the majority will go pro in something other than sports. It's absolutely the truth. So when I say what I'm about to say, it has zero to do with the athletes themselves or even some of the coaches. The culture surrounding the U of A athletic department to me is not something I enjoy anymore. I still am a fan. I think I can be a fan in a vacuum of certain teams and players and parts of it, but I don't enjoy it anymore because I think there is this corporate-ease mindset that is pertinent across all of college athletics. And again, so I'm not criticizing any of the individuals that work there who I'm friends with, but the corporate-ease mindset has really taken over just doing what's right. I can go back to this past summer. This goes back to this whole ethical thing of journalism and whatever. So this is pre Book Richardson and Sean Miller. This is pre Rich Rod. I'm talking about the problems surrounding these folks. This is before Orlando Bradford, the former running back, had finally gotten sentenced, and before all the new allegations came out of gang rapes and sexual assaults and stuff, when it was just believed that all he did was kidnap his girlfriend and beat her up. Only that. The students of the Wildcat wrote an editorial last summer that pretty much said, hey, I thought it was kind of positive. It basically said, hey, we got a new president and a new athletic director. This is great. They now have a chance to right this ship with athletics. You have the Elliot Pitts situation a couple of years ago, basketball player who was accused of sexually assaulting a student, and ultimately, through whatever means, I don't know if it was because of that, but ultimately left school. You have the Craig Carter situation. That was the track coach who had the relationship with one of the student athletes, and that she's saying was tantamount to rape because of how he created that relationship and the dominance he oversaw her and how he held her career and her life in his hands, basically. You then have Orlando Bradford, the football running back, who at the point he was kicked off the team, it was for kidnapping and other male dominance type situations. It ultimately has evolved and even more than that. Those were the big things that had occurred. And the Wildcat Opinions Board wrote an editorial saying, it's time for athletics to be transparent about what's going on with the athletic department and how they're going to fix this culture of male dominance and sexual and physical assaults and so forth. It was kind of innocuous, to be honest, because it didn't really call for anything specific like an editorial normally does or should. But that week, the editors of the Wildcat and myself received multiple phone calls from athletic department officials, extremely upset with the fact the Wildcat would run something like that, and the fact that they would run it without asking what these so-called things they're doing are, to change these cultures. And I said some things I regret to the person that I spoke to, and I've spoken to that person and I've apologized for what I said, but I was very upset because the relationship between student media and the athletic department was kind of dangled by a thread to me. basically saying, this isn't how we want to conduct this relationship, essentially, and we're going to have to possibly rethink that. And I was very disappointed in that threat. That's happened many, many times because of a dislike of coverage or opinion pieces or what have you. And so the reason I bring all that up is that fast forward 6 months and the Daily Star and other outlets are basically saying the same thing. So I get really turned off, I guess, is the long and short of it, by the lack of institutional ability for the athletic department as a full organization, not individuals, because I think there's the majority, the 99% of people I've met and gotten to deal with on a very limited basis. I mean, I don't work with that athletic department regularly, but that I've gotten to meet are incredibly dedicated people who care about their craft and really care about what they do and are good at what they do. But the culture as a whole has been very dismissive of some of the issues that we're talking about here. And the fact that students, like the Wildcat students, want to bring that up gets lambasted. I mean, that just seemed crazy to me. And sure enough, fast forward and you have all this other stuff that's continued to come up. I mean, let's think of this. There are 4 big issues or 5 big issues. So we mentioned Craig Carter, Elliot Pitts, and that's over with. I'm not trying to keep bringing it up, but Craig Carter, Elliot Pitts, Orlando Bradford, Rich Rodriguez, and Book Richardson. 5 major situations, many of which, if I'm not mistaken, 3 of which are centered around lawsuits or claims for money against the university or the individual that is part of it. Really fascinating to me that of those 5, the most palatable, the most socially acceptable is the one where you have a guy who was investigated by the FBI, indicted by the U.S. attorney, and is facing 64 years in prison or 30 or 46 years in prison. I forget what the number is. Meaning the Book Richardson situation, which includes federal crimes, is easily the most socially palatable of those 4. That's saying something, or those 5. So I don't know. It's to me, my taste for being all in has kind of gone away. At the same time, I consider myself the biggest front runner on the planet, and I'm not ashamed of that. I prefer stories. It's why I was a journalist. I like a good story. You'll see me rooting for UMBC tonight. You'll see me rooting for Loyola Chicago next weekend. I want to see great, incredible things happen. And I think that that's absolutely exists within the U of A athletic department. So I'm going to root for those stories without a doubt. But I'm not going to be blindly rooting for nothing but red and blue all the time from an athletic standpoint. From the university, I want to see the university succeed because I care about it. I'm employed by it. I invest my time and life into it. But athletics, I think, is a completely different planet. And I think it's beyond time that we really decide whether it's necessary to have that separated from the typical college experience, which is a shame because I think it was such a great part of my college experience too. And I think you would say the same.
Yeah. One of the first things, I don't think it's necessarily indicative of not liking certain things anymore. I think as you are in the same job for a little bit while, you start to see things from a different perspective, and you start to notice when you first graduate college and you get your first job, you're so excited that you have a job and you have some sort of career and that you're on your feet and that you're employed, that it's just great. It's great to be employed. After a while, there has to be some level of cynicism that sneaks in because you see things for what they really are. And it's the same thing in the teaching profession. And there are aspects of how things work. Like, get away from all the cliche, just everything, and how do things actually work, and how much can you actually do as an educator? And then you've got the kid piece, and then you've got the you as the teacher piece, and then you've got the administrative piece. And so, and the whole, as far as things being covered, teacher walkouts. Well, if teachers are walking out or striking, it's because they don't care about kids versus, well, teachers are greedy because they want more money. I mean, whoa, crazy stuff. Which is not all that dissimilar to the athlete department, dynamic at the university. But then also we talk about culture of male dominance or of male violence or this or that. Like, this is not at all to excuse what the kids are doing. But by the time the kids show up at a university, doesn't matter what university it is, they're a product of the 18 years that they lived before that point. And so it's not as though you have all wonderful, great kids who get to the U of A and then they're corrupted at the U of A or whatever college it is. While there might be certain things that, make it seem to be a little okayish, I find it difficult to put all the responsibility on a school. They need to act absolutely when they hear certain things, but at the same time, I believe so much more in personal accountability. You need to have your stuff together.
Sure, that's fair. That's fair.
As a kid whatsoever, just everyone else was doing it, and so I did it. I think that's absolute nonsense, and I think you need to take care of your stuff. Again, that's not to excuse any department, any university, any organization that has a culture of rape or of male dominance or of anything that's wrong. Like that definitely does exist, and if you are not critical of that, and if you don't handle those things, then you are.
I think you're making a totally fair argument, and something I hadn't thought of it that way. I think that's a totally fair point, especially when something's as big as like at a university like University of Arizona, the athletic department is. It's very large, not as large as some others, and so you're talking about a lot of moving parts. I think that's a really, really fair point, and I think something that I don't like saying that something like an athletic department, to use this example again, has a culture of. And this is, I might get shot down for this, and I'm open to anybody telling me I'm wrong or changing my mind. I think I would like to think that the athletic department doesn't have a culture of rape or misogyny or any of these things, but it doesn't have a culture of not having those things, if that makes sense. Meaning, like, to your point about accountability, I think it's impossible when you look at one or two examples or three examples to say, oh, the entire department is like this. But I also think that proves that the department has the responsibility to do more to help its young people realize that it's not acceptable. And maybe they do. But that's half the problem, is that we don't know that out in the public sphere. You can't have an entire athletic department that has a culture of anything, because it's way too diverse. And even a team, how many players on the U of A football team? Yeah, that's fair.
How many players even within that? They're not going to all hang out together. And so really, when you're talking about issues from a specific team, and again, I'm not defending football teams, I'm not defending U of A, I'm just saying that within the conversation we're having about this is something that should probably be brought up and addressed. Again, I'm not defending anything. Just think about if you have 60 guys on the team? How many are on the roster? Let's say you have
something like that.
Right? Not all those guys are going to hang out in the same spot at the same time. You're going to have a lot of individual groups within that group. So if you are equating this sort of bad culture, when really it's just within a team, it's a small part within a part. So you're isolating, 5 or 6 guys out of an entire team of 50 or 60 or however many on the roster, which is a part of hundreds and hundreds as the whole. And it's really it's kind of unfair to a program. Again, I'm not defending a program, because there are you do have to tell kids, if you're going to be a student athlete at this school, these are the things that you have to do. You've got to get your stuff together. All right, we're not going to tolerate this sort of nonsense, and you can't get away with this sort of stuff. But there's a lot of it's unfair at times to judge an entire.
That's fair. That's school. Totally fair.
Again, not defend, just something to also bring up and to look at. But yeah, people hear what they want to hear, and they want to take that out of context, and they can, I guess, do that. But when they listed a bunch of schools that were also mentioned in that FBI thing. Mm-hmm. Mentioned is so different, because if you are to mention Duke and you mention Arizona, well, the Arizona stuff is potentially,
and that's exactly the Sean Miller argument and the due process question we were talking about. Is Sean Miller is not denying that he had a conversation with Christian Dawkins. He's not denying that somebody offered money for a pathway of money to a player to essentially come to Arizona. He's not denying what Hansen even said, which that it was a different player. It wasn't DeAndre Ayton. In fact, he's adamantly saying it wasn't DeAndre Ayton. But he's also saying that I did nothing wrong at the same time. So if you read the verbiage of the ESPN report, it's implying that there was wrongdoing. I mean, that's the purpose of them writing it. But it's very careful to not say Sean Miller orchestrated a payment to DeAndre Ayton or a player. It's saying Sean Miller was caught on tape discussing a payment. discussing a payment. You and I could discuss a $5 payment from me to you via Venmo in the next 5 minutes. And if I don't actually send you the $5, it didn't happen. So I think that the language is really fascinating on this, like you're talking about. And it goes back to that same thing that's even Miller's entire argument is that again, for argument's sake, let's say he's telling the truth, which he deserves. I don't know, deserves maybe not the right word, but I'm willing to give him that for now. And say, okay, until, because of due process and so forth, until proven otherwise, I'm willing to say that. And I think a lot of people are. I even think a Hansen is, based on what he's written, but I don't think a lot of people want to read that. They just want to keep going on the path they're going on. But no, you're right that the word mention or the qualification that's given really creates completely different vantage points for different things that are involved.
Yeah. It's our responsibility as consumers to take what we hear about all these issues and then discuss it. It's not, I heard this and so I'm going to jump on this side. It's so much comes out. It's not even just in anything, any information that we have out there, whether it be political, whether it be whatever. It's us to take this conversation, take what we've heard, and just add that to our conversation or what we think. It can't be, I have to decide. Right? Should Miller be fired or should he not? It's not about yes or no. It's that there's a lot of going on here. And who am I as some guy who just reads stuff and listens to stuff in Ketchikan, Alaska, to join one side or the other? And that part of the fickleness of you have to decide right now, which side are you on? Well, there's so much to consider. Like, I don't know. I'm going to be in the middle of this one because I don't know enough. And being fine and content with the middle with some of these things, and knowing that things are way too complex to read one thing which convinces you, and now I feel better in my brain because I say that he should be fired or that he shouldn't be fired or that I should vote Republican or Democrat or hunting should be illegal or whatever. It's our consumers. The consumer responsibility, and me not talking as a journalist that's saying you need to get it right, that's your job. But as me as a consumer myself, I feel my personal responsibility is to not be, like you said before about, Greg Hansen has been a respected writer for a very long time. Like him or don't like him, he's a respected writer. And for one column to be blown out of proportion, how much longer are you going to do this?
I'll be fair. I'm not even certain it was blown out of proportion. I just think people have the right, as you're pointing out, to decide, I don't like this guy, I don't want to read him. I also have the right to say, I think that's crazy, and I'm going to continue to read his stuff and believe in what he stands for beyond this 1 week. And that's, I think that's the best part is we do have choice.
Yeah. Free country, man. We can be as irrational or rational as we want. And I think we get so caught up in these things, and our life revolves around what's going to happen with this issue. And if my world is dependent upon Arizona basketball and what happens in these next 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever happens with Sean Miller, whatever happens with the team next year, man, that's going to be kind of a rough existence for me going forward. If I'm so tied to something I can't control, we outsource our control to issues, to teams. It's kind of scary.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because, Brett, we're not 23, 24 years old anymore.
Oh my God.
Dude, I was
40 and I am 30.
I know. I was talking about movies that, couldn't be made if they were made today. And, when you say, that came out when I was in college, that movie couldn't be made now because of the political correctness or the whatever. Well, that was like 20 years ago now. We're not talking about, 4 or 5 years. We're talking 20 years. Lots changed since then.
Yeah. What's an example of one?
What we're thinking about. It depends on who were to make it, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. But it's funny that some people kind of get a pass. Like South Park I don't watch South Park much at all, but I do know that they comment on society a lot, and so sometimes you can watch part of it like, oh, dude, that's commenting on this, and they're not politically correct, and it's kind of silly, but it's under the guise of comedy. But some movie topics, some things that you just look at and and it's not your 1980s football quarterback protagonist, not going to happen. Your Patrick Swayze Roadhouse type protagonist has been altered, but it still kind of exists. But culturally, things are different than they were when we were in college. It's
No, you're right.
different, but I don't know. In some parts, better. It's nice that we're being conscious about a lot of these things, and things that I wouldn't have even thought was maybe wrong. It's now being brought to my attention. So, okay. All right. I mean,
I'm okay with, and this is a very male privileged thing to say, and I admit that, but I'm also okay with saying,
the fact right there that you preface it now either means that we're at a point where you have to really watch what you say and use qualifiers, or that we're more conscious. So some would argue.
I think both, and that's actually about literally the point I think I'm going to make to some extent is I'm okay with self-preservation being a reason for adapting. I've had conversations with students who don't understand why they have to change their mindset and personality to adapt to the desires and needs and expectations of women who are around them. Young men have to change and evolve and not be the same as they always are when it's just the guys. And I'm trying to make the argument that maybe it's not even healthy when it's just the guys, forget when they're around. Maybe it's just, that's part of the problem. But at the same time, they have a hard time hearing it. They have a hard time understanding, and that's fine. We're evolving and it's teaching. So I finally at some point get down to the self-preservation arm and just say, look, just because you don't see a problem with it doesn't mean someone else does. And the reality is I want to see you have a long and prosperous life and career. And maybe it's just realize that it's not worth it, at that point. I know it sounds really, really bad to say, but the sophomoric jokes and things like that, they might be fun. They might be entertaining, but they also may not be worth it. Even if you believe you're not doing something wrong, enough of the public believes you are. Mm-hmm. And if that's the case, I'm not suggesting fold on everything, but choose the hills you want to die on. And some of these may not be them. And so I like I said, it might be a totally male privilege thing to say that, in the sense of don't do it because it's the right thing to do. Do it because it protects yourself. I'm okay with saying it's okay if people see it as both ends, because it's, even if they don't want to admit it, they're still acknowledging that there's an issue with what they're doing or saying, if that makes sense. To your whole point, when you interjected that, me just prefacing it by that is acknowledging that there is a potential issue with it. So I think we have evolved that way. And I'm not going to stop continuing to try and, help where I can. This sounds so egotistical, but help young men be better. But at the same time, if they don't necessarily want to be better, I'm going to continue to remind them that, okay, but you're going to cause problems for yourself and the people around you if you don't.
Yeah. Just be able to ask that question, be able to say, like you said, is this really worth it, in the long run, or even in the short run?
Sending that tweet or sharing that sexist text message, or that whatever. Is that worth it? Is that worth it? Did you really get something out of that was worth potentially throwing away so much?
Yeah. Who has the burden of responsibility? The person to not be offended by what you do, or you to consider who might be offended? So rather than, well, you need to stop being so sensitive.
I think I would love to say both. I think I would love to say both people have a responsibility, but I'm also cognizant to say that that's even unfair. That one's an active reaction and one's a passive reaction. And to me, the person who is doing the action has the responsibility.
I think whatever one you are is the one.
On the surface, it's nice to say both would be able to see what the other person's really like and understand where they're coming from and so forth. But I think that's unfair to the idea that, someone shouldn't have to ask, hey, please don't offend me today. Okay.
I can only control what I say and how I react. And so if I'm at the mercy of how someone else reacts to what I say, then I'm giving them the control. And so I would rather not be in those situations where I'm so worried about it. At the same time, I don't want to self-censor myself and be so scared to say what I think that,
it's funny you bring that part up. I don't know if we have more time here to dive into another sort of journalism type topic on this same topic, but I'm struggling with social media right now a lot. I use Twitter not because I think it's some great bastion of anything, but because I like the fire hose aspect of the news feed, that it's where I get my information and my news. It's where I get the stuff that powers my knowledge. It's how I collect. I follow people and things that provide information that I want on certain topics. And the problem is the reaction aspect for me, my self-control
And not that I say anything bad, but that I think I mentioned it earlier. I poke at things that I don't like, and then I just get railroaded because I'm just not good at it. I'm not good at the arguments. And so it's not even worth going at it, but yet I'm struggling with the self-control on that front. So I bring all that up because I've debated, should I just shut it down? But then I think I would be losing a great source of where I get some information from. I follow a lot of news organizations, journalists, existing entities around the world and country that provide information on what they're doing, in addition to friends and so forth. So what do you think about that from just not a journalistic standpoint, but I mean, is there a detriment to it that we're not seeing to being involved in some of these sort of, because I find the way people talk, and I'm guilty of it, and I'm trying really hard to not be, the sarcastic kind of shameless way people talk to each other on Twitter in particular, to be just awful. And I don't like being a part of it anymore, but I don't know how not to hit reply.
It's so incredibly difficult because if you are trying to reduce an incredibly complex issue down to one tweet or meme, you can't possibly do it because it oversimplifies things. And my biggest politics up here has to do with, resource management and development. And that's particularly logging, fishing, and hunting, because the vast majority of the meat that I eat is meat that I hunt myself, either through like actual hunting or for fishing. But the arguments against that are out there, anti-hunting because it's mean, because it's cruel, because it's whatever. And so how am I supposed to still have a voice and defend the way of life, not in the way of I'm trying to justify it, but hey, trying to get you to understand when I know that people aren't going to understand it. So do I, every chance I get, reply and get involved, knowing that it's not going to change anybody's mind? No one has ever said, gosh, you know what, because of your tweet, I have changed my politics. I have changed my view on whatever. Or do I just stay quiet and have conversations with the people I know I can have conversations with? But
that's half the problem. I'm not saying for you, but I mean, that's half the problem is we're funneling all this information that we already know and we like and we're comfortable with. If we go down that road, we're doing exactly what we talk about as the bad part of social media, which is that it's you're only hearing the stuff that you already agree with and believe in. And so I try hard to not unfollow and block and to keep people in my feed that I could just vehemently disagree with, because, there's a phrase that I love, and it's not like some famous, politician or God, why did I say politician? Famous, social person, I don't know what the word I'm looking for. Some famous person that is great at these things. It's really from a TV show, but it's a line that I love, and it's, if you're dumb, surround yourself with smart people. And if you're smart, surround yourself with smart people who disagree with you. Yeah. And I truly believe in that. And I'm totally fine with people trying to change my mind. I do not lock up. I get my mind changed a lot, which is why I also hate calling politicians, oh, that guy waffled. And I hate the idea of old takes exposed. Like, that's part of our society now, is the concept. And I'm not ripping on the Twitter account, but I think it's one of the funniest and worst Twitter accounts on the planet, old takes exposed. It's like, really, we can't just say something, not even about, serious things, but about like sports, and without it just becoming a thing, and maybe on the same end, I should just lighten up because they're just playing around. But excuse me, but that concept is really fascinating. And I'm really, really scared that I'm going to fall into a trap as somebody who cares about knowledge, who cares about being educated, who cares about people educating me, that I'm going to fall into a trap of, it's just easier if I just listen to the stuff that's not going to cause me headaches. Yeah. And so I've debated, how do I deal with that on Twitter? It's not so much the hearing what other people are saying. It's my responses that I don't like getting in the middle of. And I also just think that people tend to have these, they put a cape on and think they can fly when they go on Twitter. And I just don't see it. I don't see it. And so I don't know.
Yeah. It's only going to get worse. I mean, it's only going to get to a point where the choose your side, you're on our team or you're against us, rather than, like you said, having people who are going to challenge you and your worldviews, not in a way that make you feel wrong, but at least consider things. Because once you consider certain things, and I understand why you disagree, now that I understand that, I can now reshape.
Yeah, evolve an opinion.
I have a depth of knowledge I didn't have before. I followed a very active vegan who has a very high following. just because I wanted some perspective, because I was really feeling a pro hunting type. And so she's been great because she's really not she's not anti-hunting. She's just so pro-vegan lifestyle. And so you get the impression that like a vegan is militant and very against hunting, but she's just very pro. And it's that perspective that I don't have to be confrontational. I don't have to be angry every time someone mentions veganism. That's just their chosen way of life. And you don't have to be combative. You don't have to be confrontational. So I think that it's refreshing when you encounter people, and if you open your eyes to people who have different opinions, you don't have to put up that wall. And I think that's what I've taken from those instances in which I do, in which I remind myself, it's a lot less frustrating to be able to take that breath and get it. But it is, knowing when to comment and what to say is always going to be difficult. And I don't think it's going to get easier. It's just more of an individual, how you feel about that dynamic and what it is to be alive today.
Yeah. I got to find the self-control, I think, to not try and clap back at everybody. Cause that's funny. Cause this is the problem. I don't do that in real life. I mean, I might seem like I'm louder than I have more bark than bite in a lot of cases, but I definitely don't do that in real life. But I also, I don't know. I don't know why I feel like 140 or 280 characters now means it's okay to just, okay. So I guess to me, I don't know how to, I don't know. I think because it's such shortened attention spans and we only have so many characters to write that we kind of take the humanity out of it. And it's just like, let's just go direct. What the hell are you talking about? That's the part that I think is really kind of strange.
Well, I think it's a good stopping point right there. Yeah, let's we want to step back in when it's about Final Four time and reevaluate stuff. We can get back on there. But thanks for being on here, man.
All right, thanks, Jeff. I appreciate it. Talk to you soon.
Take care, buddy. That will do it for episode 32. Make sure you continue following the March Madness tournament and be thinking about all these student journalists who are trying to find their way covering these basketball teams, these basketball programs. Thanks again to Brett Fera for being on here, and we'll talk to you next time.